So today we're going to be finishing our notes. Your notes that you'll need to access are either going to be labeled 216 or 217. On Thursday, we did slides 1 through 4. So you should have those completed through here. We'll be starting on slide 5 today, discussing textiles, another one of the technologies that came out of the Bronze Age. These notes will follow our usual pattern where you will need to click on the red text box and then you can type in the word as it appears on the YouTube video. If you need to pause or rewatch any part of this, please feel free to do so, as you do not want to miss any important information, especially since your test is going to be coming up next week. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Please make sure that you are following along and let me know if you have any questions. So again, on Thursday, we began to discuss the different technologies that emerged during the Bronze Age period after the agricultural revolution, where people began to rely on metals like bronze to create new tools and technologies. We talked about a lot of farming tools on Thursday, pottery to store surplus food, the plow to break up the soil, which helped make farming more efficient, and large-scale irrigation systems that were so important the king was responsible for planning them, and without them we would not have the large-scale farming necessary to support their booming populations. Today we're going to start by talking about textiles. Textiles are the cloth or fabric that is woven, knitted, or otherwise manufactured. Dress and certain fabrics were recognized as expressive and a means of social distinction. We still see that clothing is used as a way to express ourselves and show our personalities. People will often choose clothing based on their favorite colors, if it has logos for their favorite team. Also, when I discuss social distinction, this is the ability to tell what social class people were a part of based on what they wear. We talked about this when we first introduced social hierarchy. And this is something that we still see today. People that are in a higher social class or higher up on the social hierarchy will wear more expensive clothing, have access to different textiles and fabrics, whereas people of lower social classes will often have fewer items of clothing, less colorful, vibrant fabrics. Dress also represented one's culture, upbringing, moral standards, economic status, and social power, and became a powerful tool to enforce class differences. Again, this is going to greatly influence social hierarchy. One example of this can be seen here in this image. We see that these women here have colorful clothing with many different patterns, while this man here has a simple tunic on. The man would have been of a lower social class, as his clothing is very basic, while these women would have been of a higher social class. As we can see that they have different types of shoes, they have different patterns, different colors on their clothing. Over here is one of the oldest examples of clothing from this time period. And the clothing gets its color because it has been dyed using clay. During this time period, if they wanted colors in their clothes, they would use many natural resources like clay, plants and flowers, and even fruits and vegetables. If you had access to dyed clothing, it meant that you were of a higher social standing. The next new technology and innovation, we're going to talk about metallurgy. This is the art of producing metal tools. The picture below is an example of an early kiln. We can see this man digging up the soil to find the minerals needed to create metal. Those minerals would then be put into a kiln to be melted down. And then the melted down metal ores would be poured into a caster mold to create the bronze weapon or tool they needed. Again, metallurgy is the art and science of producing metal goods. This includes the process of mining and extracting the metal from the mineral ores to shaping the metal objects. People in settled villages had more time to learn about and experiment with metal ores, which corresponded with people experimenting with pottery and the use of high temperatures to harden clay. So as we settle in these villages and begin to farm, we're able to produce more food than we need. So we do not need everybody farming at the same time. This means that people have more time to experiment. And so they discovered that when they use a process similar to the process they were using to create pottery, they're able to create metal tools. Again, that's that kiln that I just was talking about in the slide of the picture. Moreover, farmers had more need for metal tools. They made many of the tasks involved in farming much easier. Nomads, on the other hand, could benefit from metal tools, but they did not need them nearly as much. They could herd their animals and raise them for their products using the same stone, bone, and wood tools they had been using for a long time. We talked about nomads in our previous unit, specifically pastoral nomads, those responsible for raising large herds of animals, and they chose to continue to travel around as opposed to settling in one area. Hopefully you remember that. If not, your weekly reading this week does focus on nomads and their way of life. So that should be a good review before your test next week. Tin and copper were the main metals used to create bronze. Bronze was very expensive and hard to come by during this time period. So they were generally controlled by those who were wealthy and in power. So again, we have the new technology and new innovation that begins to represent wealth and power. First textiles and now metal. Metal, particularly gold, became a status symbol that represented power. Bronze in the form of weapons represented power even more directly, as those rulers with armies who had bronze weapons could gain more power. Again, we know that city-states are fighting more during this time period over resources and the idea of expanding their empires. So those city-states that had access to bronze and bronze weapons were often more successful in warfare. A couple examples here. Again, pottery is big, so now we have moved on just from using clay to also using metal. We also have a bronze basin here that would have been used either for drinking water or for hygiene purposes. Down here we see different bronze cutting implements. You can see that they've clearly been shaped to be circular for cutting tools or pointed, possibly for weaponry or digging implements. We also see bronze sword here that would have been popular in wartime. We also see that once we begin using metal, we begin to be very good at it, and we can add a lot of this decorative detailing here that we see both in the sword and in the basin. The last technology that we're going to talk about are wheels and wheeled vehicles. This is an early example of a chariot. The use of the wheel ranged from basic transportation. Before the wheel, they mostly relied on the waterways that acted as a highway. But we'll see that wheeled vehicles become popular as they are easier to control. Remember, the Tigris and Euphrates River especially are very difficult to navigate, so wheeled vehicles make it easier. Trade, carrying goods in wagons. Warfare, machinery like mills where they would grind down the large seeded grasses to create flour, which could be used to bake bread and other foods. And then moving heavy objects for construction. We know construction is going on during this time period, as we talked about it in our Edpuzzle video about the construction of the Great Pyramids in Egypt during the Old Kingdom. as well as in other city-states in Mesopotamia where they are building large palaces like those that house the Hanging Gardens. As wheeled vehicles could only be used when pulled by horses, these chariots also became symbols of wealth and power. Horses were difficult to come by and expensive to maintain. So if you could afford one, you were very wealthy. Members of the elite and rulers probably wanted to be buried with their chariots as a sign of their wealth and importance, maybe because they hoped to use them in the afterlife. And again, that was something that was discussed in our Ed Puzzle video, how Egypt and Mesopotamia both viewed life after death. Chariots were also important during warfare as they allowed people to travel over further distances at a faster rate. This also enabled ideas and products to be spread more quickly. As I mentioned, they often would be buried with people so they could be used in the afterlife. This picture here is remains found in an Egyptian tomb. We can see they often would bury the horses with them as well. And then this mosaic here, found in what is now present-day Turkey, shows the man riding off into war, followed by the goddess of war in these wheeled vehicles. Here we have our map showing how technology spread. You can see it starts in this red zone and then continues to expand. And once we have the wheeled vehicles, things begin to move very quickly. Now, this idea of spreading of new ideas and technology is this idea of cultural diffusion, which we have talked about in the past. So if we look at these two words separately, starting with culture, which we had talked about and you guys did a weekly reading on, is the way of life of a group of people, including all of their customs, food, language, music, etc. And then the word diffusion specifically talks about the spreading out of something spreading from one central point. So when we put these two together, our definition for cultural diffusion states that it's the spreading out of the way of life of a group of people, including their customs, food, language, and music. Technology was spread through Afroeurasia because of cultural diffusion and the increased global trade. This is the beginning of our global economy, our global society, where we have many different cultures, many different civilizations interacting and trading for resources and other goods. Before these technologies, there would have been less to trade with, and trade would have been slower and more difficult. There would have been less demand for certain products and resources as well. Conflict also would have been less deadly with simpler weapons. Metal weapons and chariots would have made it easier to kill larger numbers of people at once. Battle strategy would have been more direct with simple weapons as well. Also, more people would not have fought over certain resources if there was no need for those resources. Kingdoms needing mineral and timber might invade other areas, but if they did not need those resources as much, they might not have been invaded. Conflict before these technologies might have been over access to land or water, as opposed to access to supplies of copper and tin. Those groups with greater access to technology, like chariots and bronze, gained more power. And this is going to be the start of the Age of Empires, where we see what used to be small cities expanding to larger city-states and then being taken over by other groups to create large empires. And we talked about this again with Mesopotamia first being combined together under one empire, under Hammurabi, and being taken over by the Assyrians, who believed war was necessary for the world to keep turning, and then eventually being taken over by the Persians. We also talked about this in Egypt, as the lower kingdom overtook the upper kingdom. and different rulers came in and set up their empires in that civilization. We'll talk more about this idea of conflict and cooperation next time we are together. But at this point, your notes are done. If you need to rewatch or re-listen to any part, feel free to do so, because again, you do not want to miss anything important. Please email me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.